Hello and welcome to Honey Badger Radio number 30. Toxic Femininity. How dare you! How dare you! Okay, sorry. Now that I fucked everyone's ears up. Okay, so before we get into it, I just wanted to thank everybody who wrote in. Oops, I gotta mute you there, Theron. You got a lot of interesting things happening. It sounds like you're in a kitchen throwing around some pots and pans.
I'm at school, I'll mute.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to thank everyone who after we read out TD's letter.
How are you? Sorry, hold on. Okay.
Oh my God! Oh,
what the hell?
Sorry.
Wait. Let me double check as well.
We're good. We're good.
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't be a Honey Badger Radio without technical issues.
Without somebody having the actual live stream open and playing on the delay.
You know we have been replaced by pod people when we have absolutely no problems.
Replacing podcast people with pod people. That sounds kind of interesting.
It sounds scary. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
It would be podception, I guess. Anyway, I'm going to finally get this out. All right. So those of you who wrote in solidarity with the individual, the young gay man who felt very alienated, and from both straight and other gay men, I wanted to thank you for writing in. What I'm probably going to do is I'm going to compile all of your letters and I'm going to send it to him to take a look at. And I mean, he hasn't actually responded to me yet, but I feel like that's really the best we could do, is to just reach out and say, there's other people who are experiencing what you're experiencing, and they not only appreciate you coming out and talking about it because they don't feel as alone, but they would also like to extend their hand out to talk with you and see if you're interested in making that connection. So once again, I want to thank you for that. I don't know if there's much more we can do, but we will do that. And I think we can get right into it. So does anybody want to make some? Does anyone want to talk about the subject, toxic femininity?
I wrote a thing. You wanted me to say something about it, Alison?
Sure. Yeah. Like you feel free to read your thing, or thing your thing, or.
I'll read it, but it's not. I wrote it really quickly, so it's very colloquial. So.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Colloquial works with us.
Yeah, it's a good word too.
Also quaint. Quaint works.
Oh, it's not quaint. I wish it was quaint.
Oh, but if it's not quaint, then that just means it's dirty and sophisticated.
Okay, let me just get into it. Let's get it over with. Okay. Women always say that married men live longer, and I say, so does an indoor cat. It's a furball with a broken spirit that can only look out on a world it can never enjoy. But it does technically live longer. That was a quote from one of Bill Maher's stand-up routines, where he touched on one of the many instances of toxic gendered behavior expressed by women. The trope of the domineering wife who restricts and controls her henpecked husband's behavior to her liking is a classic example of women's power by proxy. Women's agency, that is to say, women's ability to affect the world around them, lies within women's ability to affect the decisions.
Goodness, it sounds like you're having like an emergency there, and.
Oh my goodness. Okay,
we're gonna have to wait till. Okay. Oh yeah, I know. I thought it was Brian because Brian lives in Chicago.
Okay, I'm gonna find a quieter place and.
That's racist.
Oh, it's racist against Chicago.
You heard sirens and like gunshots and shit, and you're like, "That's Brian. I'm gonna mute him."
You're now going to the entire Chicagoan race on your ass, Allison.
Yeah.
Chicagoans. Oh my God.
The war on Chirac.
Oh. I'm gonna have to find my bunker in the deep winter. I'll have to excavate a snowdrift to hide. Hopefully you guys won't come and get me.
So I didn't know crimes were committed in Victoria or wherever Theron is at.
Well, it might not actually be a crime. It might be somebody who's sick or having some trouble. Theron's in Vancouver, not Victoria. Victoria is much more bucolic.
And if she's at
too many deer.
If she's at school, she's right downtown.
Yeah.
which sucks because it's like lots of sirens, lots of noise, lots of people, lots of cars. So.
Yeah, and Victoria has all those fucking deer.
Yeah, I was gonna say if a deer was shot or something or was like hit on the road on accident, it's possible they could have called an ambulance because they care about their deer there a lot.
No, they don't.
No.
How's this, guys? Is that better?
Beautiful.
Actually, it's significantly better. All right, we've been talking about the deer problem in Victoria, so.
Okay.
All right, once more from the top, Darren.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm so sorry, guys. Women always say that married men live longer, and I say, so does an indoor cat. It's a furball with a broken spirit that can only look out on a world it can never enjoy. But it does technically live longer. That was a quote from one of Bill Maher's stand-up routines, where he touched on one of the many instances of toxic gendered behavior exhibited by women. The trope of the domineering wife who restricts and controls her hen-pecked husband's behavior to her liking is a classic example of women's power by proxy. Women's agency, that is to say women's ability to affect the world around them, lies within women's ability to affect the decisions and behaviors of others around them. One may ask oneself, but if women are so effective at manipulating the agency of other people, have they not as much, if not more, agency than men? Is the tyranny of female hyper-agency, as Karen puts it, not then invalid? Well, not quite. Women's agency and power lies not within their ability to control and manipulate the outer world, but rather to manipulate the inner world of others. As Louis C.K. puts it, like a man will cut your arm off and throw it in a river, but he will leave you as a human being intact. Women may be non-violent, but they will shit inside of your heart. The insidious nature of such power and such agency is exactly what allows our culture to see women as mere acted-upon objects. It's what allows women to get away with starting a war and claiming that as powerful men who send other men off to war. This may constitute the number one reason I find feminism to be so absolutely bullshitty. It gets away with a surface-level analysis of gendered power structures, holding up a facade of men's monopoly on executive power and agency, while completely glancing over women's rule of the internal world. That world where every thought and every choice is conceived before it translates into an action. By controlling and manipulating the collective internal world, women influence and shape the external world by starting at the very core of society. But toxic femininity is not necessarily the same thing as toxic femaleness. Femininity can be exhibited by a woman, a man, a group, or a society. Western society has reached a point where the feminine values are overstated. One of these values being fairness. And while fairness may seem virtuous at best and innocuous at worst, it has great potential of being tyrannical. To quote Louis C.K. again, the other day one of my daughter's toys broke, and she demanded that I break her sister's toy to make it fair. In North American schools, fairness is so overvalued that it comes at the expense of competition and the commending of achievement. Despite my little brother's high academic standing, he has never received a single accolade for it, because it just might make students of low academic standing feel bad about themselves, and that's simply not fair. Just the other day, I was listening to a John Stossel show on internships, and one guest was defending some states who have banned unpaid internships on the grounds that some students cannot afford to work for free, so therefore nobody is allowed to gain the experience of an internship if it is unpaid. So everyone being disadvantaged is better than being advantaged, even when it is in no way at another's expense, simply because it's more fair. It is the exact same principle as a kid insisting that her sister's toy be broken because hers is. Feminine values, fairness over competition and progress, sensitivity over truth, and commitment to the collective over commitment to oneself are laudable and necessary traits in moderation. But the overstatement and overvaluing of feminine values within a culture is usually a symptom of that culture's decadence and abundance, like the state of the Roman Empire just before its decline. Feminists will tell you that misogyny is to blame for the fact that we as a society are lenient toward both masculine and feminine expression when expressed by women, but intolerant toward feminine expression when expressed by men. But a person who is allowed to express both masculine and feminine values is a person who is allowed to be fully human. Any reasonable person would agree that allowing women full human status while denying men the same is misandry, not misogyny. Men couldn't really afford to be fully human in the past. It was important for women to be fully human and keep their humanity intact so they could serve as a reminder for men, spiritually so to speak. But now that we as a culture have reached a point of Roman decadence and an abundance of resources, we still somehow find a way to refuse men that status. I wonder who's to blame.
Wow.
Thank you, Theron. Theron, that's a lot of stuff a really good scaffold for a discussion.
Yeah.
And very well written, are read. You should be like a computer voice in the deep cosmos. We're floating through
I hope the
endless,
background
endless
noise is
miles.
better.
Oh yeah, no.
Oh, yeah, it's considering
Can I get a Theron GPS, please? Because that would be so much better than the current one that I have. It'd be so much more relaxed when driving.
No, but could you imagine, like, if Theron was the voice of the computer as we're hurtling through the cosmos? That would be.
Cherry would veer off, and I would veer off the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, she would, because your voice is very soothing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So people would be falling asleep at the wheel, and there would be crashes.
Okay, so obviously GPSs need to be voiced by Fran Drescher.
People would start wondering why everybody was so annoyed when they'd get to where they were going. There'd be road rage out the wazoo.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's probably not a good idea. All right. So does anybody want to jump off from that? Because if not,
actually, I want to point out something. I pointed it out in our chat, but the fairness thing, the taking fairness to that ridiculous level, that was predicted in Fahrenheit 451. That was the reason behind the dumbing down of society and the removal of books. Was part of that was that people didn't want to be made to feel less smart than other people. And the authoritative response to that was to dumb everything down so that the lowest common denominator of intelligence within society did not ever have to be embarrassed that anyone else was ever smarter than them in any way. And it's something that I saw happen with students advocating it when I was in school, and you'd have the teacher say, explain why that was a bad idea, and that everybody has their different skills and talents, and that nobody should resent other people's different skills and talents, and you work to maximize what you're good at and overcome what you have a rough time with. But it seems that over the last 20, 30 years, that mantra of everything has to be fair has led to a situation today where you get students yelling at their college professor that university is not meant to be an intellectual environment, and that it has to be a safe space, and it's all based on that feminine trait of having to have everything, of mistaking equal for identical, or mistaking them to mean the same thing. And it seems to me that this is something that really does come out of toxic femininity. It's not something that I've ever seen growing up. The boys that I played with in my neighborhood never did that. Just the girls tried to insert that into play, and even among the adults, the moms would sort of try to get the kids to be fair with each other and to be to match what each other was doing, and everybody take turns and so on, and it was the dads that had to sort of step in and say, if somebody wins, somebody wins. Don't be a sore loser. Don't be a jerk about it. If somebody gets there first, they got there first. If you're in a race, you don't have to stop and wait for the other person to catch up. To be fair, nobody should get a head start. To be fair, you don't have to front somebody an advantage just because you're better at something than they are. learn to do better, or learn to appreciate what you're good at and appreciate what other people are good at, even if they're not the same things. And it takes that balance in order to produce a group that can achieve together and that can even work together. And we're getting to the point now where we're creating safe spaces everywhere, like this new pillow fort that's a safe space from the safe space that Tumblr had started to become. And eventually, with this continuing, we're going to get to the point where the so-called cooperative gender is going to create a space in the world in which nobody can work together because everything has to be fair.
Yeah, that's some pretty profound insights into fairness. And sometimes things have to be divided based on merit, based on what people bring to the table, based on how hard they work, based on whether or not they're a net gain versus a net negative to a group. And that's can be a difficult situation to be in. And it's nice to think that everything can be ruled by fairness, that everybody can give or can work, can achieve equally. Or is it nice? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it would be nice to think that, but I think that everybody here knows that that's just a pipe dream, and that if you're going to impose equality of outcome, especially if you base your desire for that on some kind of utopian goal of perfect equality, like that's what led to the mass murder of the kulaks and then the mass starvation of their neighbors. Because hey, they're more successful than their neighbors. They're an emerging bourgeoisie class. They need to be done away with because they're the enemies of equality. And then, oh wait, what do you mean it was the kulaks and the surpluses they produced that were feeding all of their neighbors, and now their neighbors are starving? Oh well, right? But they're all equally dead, right? So it's all good. It's fair, right?
Yeah.
You have that kind of a utopian goal of equality, and it doesn't matter who you hurt. It's worth it to get there.
That actually reminds me of the whole mosh pit thing, and banning mosh pits because disabled people can't be in mosh pits.
What?
Yeah, there was an initiative that because mosh pits are not accessible to the disabled, they should be banned.
Are you? Okay, you're joking.
Not shitting.
You're joking.
No.
That's why Uber isn't available in Vancouver, because they're not wheelchair accessible. So if people in wheelchairs can't ride Uber, then no one can ride Uber. That's just how it works.
I'm honestly not surprised by the whole mosh pit thing. I'm really not. In fact, I'm surprised that somebody didn't come out and attack it as an example of toxic masculinity sooner, because it is a very physically competitive. I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry.
Oh my God, Hannah, how could you?
Brace yourself.
It's autumn. God damn it.
Brace yourself for the Hannah tsunami.
It's a very physically competitive environment. You're slamming into each other for fun. You're obviously the head banging and the body slamming and all of that. I'm surprised that somebody didn't come out sooner and treat it as a way of making concerts exclusive to men and exclusionary toward women, even though there are things that women can do at concerts that are not being in the mosh pit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I just, like, how on earth does that even compute? That's like saying, okay, like, where are we? Are we, like, at Harrison Bergeron town here? Like, okay, what are they going to do next? Ban walking because it's not wheelchair accessible? What?
I just love it when you're trying to fit that into your brain.
Like,
you're struggling at it.
Yeah, no dancing either, because that's not wheelchair accessible, right? Nobody's doing the hustle anymore. Do the hustle, do. Yeah, you can't do that
But just
anymore.
for the record, dancing is wheelchair accessible. It's just done slightly differently in a wheelchair.
So is moshing.
Yeah. I'd get some pads put on mine, like a bumper car, Be
Yeah, you
awesome.
just have to be careful. It depends on the individual in a wheelchair with moshing. Some people are in a wheelchair due to conditions that make them bruise easily. Also,
Yeah, or their bones snap, they have brittle bone disease or
right?
something like that, right? But you know, like honestly, like what are we going to ban next? Like going fishing because you can't fit the wheelchair in a canoe? Like what? Like seriously?
Well, actually, 30 years ago when I was in elementary school, they were teaching us that within 20 years all the fish in the ocean would be gone because it was being overfished. And sure enough, 30 years later, they're still there. Wait a
Yeah.
minute.
Yeah. All right. All right. I'm gonna be the. Okay. Let's not get into a discussion of the fish.
Reel it back in and
Yeah. Oh, for fuck's sake.
fun. And I jumped on it before Hannah did.
She took
Oh,
the
okay.
bait.
Yeah. Oh my God, you guys are
In
awful.
your face, Hannah.
You have been hooked.
All right, okay, all right. So I actually wanted to throw some ideas out at the panelists. So if there's toxic femininity, do you believe that then a discussion of toxic masculinity is a legitimate discussion? Let's ask the challenging questions.
I do, but I think like as I don't know whether the video of my talk has gone up yet, but part of what I discussed in my talk, I talked quite a bit about toxic masculinity, and what the things feminists define as toxic masculinity, and most of them are fairly recent inventions. Most of them are fairly new. Um, they're assumptions about masculinity that only have really existed, a lot of them, since feminism. Um, Before feminism, nobody expected a man was going to knock some woman up and then run out on her kid, or at least a woman of similar status to him, right? Men didn't do that. Men got married, right? And they looked after their kids because that's what other men expected them to do, right? And there was this list on Geek Feminism about Toxic Masculinity 101, and one of the aspects of toxic masculinity was the assumption that a man wouldn't stand by his pregnant girlfriend and wouldn't live up to his responsibilities as a parent. That's toxic masculinity, is that assumption, that expectation. But patriarchal systems have all mostly been about assigning responsibility to men for the children that they create and holding them accountable for them. So it's only since feminism came on the scene and women's sexual freedom and then men's sexual freedom, the sexual revolution, that you see this massive sort of huge population of men who are absentee dads, right? Like that was never an assumption that was, and even if there were laws against abandoning your family back in patriarchal times, and there were laws against abandoning your family, but even so, I mean, like it was much more common for a woman to abandon her family. Women have always been the primary instigators of divorce. They've always been the primary ones to leave their family, to say, fuck it, I'm out of here.
Yeah, well, which might have explained why.
Of men just up and leaving their families.
Yeah, well, in terms of like what you're saying is some of the stuff that's been identified by feminism as toxic masculinity was never really a quality that was promoted in men, or even alternatively, abandoning your family as toxic masculinity. Well, it's just sort of maybe toxic humanity.
Yeah,
because women do it too.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, and there was much more there was much more stigma on the part of men, like from other men, as far as like masculinity is primarily about being honorable, being self-reliant, being responsible for others. This is the masculinity that's promoted in classical literature, mostly written by men. This is what the heroes. They might be daring. They might be more daring than the next guy. They might be more dashing than the next guy. But they're still self-reliant and self-sufficient and honorable, right? And so you just sort of have this ideal of masculinity that's existed, enforced by men on other men, right, for all of history, right? That, yeah, no, you're going to do right by her. You're going to make an honest woman of her. You knocked her up, now you're going to marry her because that's the right thing to do. That's living up to your masculine honor, right? It's only since feminism that we've seen that really begin to change.
You know, you made a really important point there regarding the genderlessness of so-called toxic masculinity. This is something I've been harping on actually in online debate from probably the beginning of my time online. Although I haven't always heard it called toxic masculinity, it just feminists that treat certain aspects of masculinity as toxic. They want to refer to genderless traits as masculine traits in order to sort of make that connection. And I kind of think they're more trying to treat all masculinity like it's toxic under the guise of criticizing dysfunctional behaviors. And what I've really noticed is, like, they'll talk about toxic femininity just a little bit here and there in order to create enough balance to justify using the phrase toxic masculinity over and over again. But what they've really made there is a buzzword to facilitate blaming men for the external pressures to which they're subjected most often by the systems and social attitudes that feminists exploit. Things like they attribute genderless dysfunction like insecurity and violent behavior and different types of prejudices as masculine behavior when they're actually completely genderless. Women engage in them as well, and women foist them off on men and expect them of men. A lot of homophobia, for instance, comes out of more of men being afraid that women won't view them as masculine than they are afraid of thinking of themselves as unmasculine, or thinking of other men thinking of them as unmasculine. It's about whether and how women view them more than it is anything else. And the same thing with violence. A lot of violence that's engaged in on behalf of women gets referred to as toxic masculinity, but that violence that's engaged in on behalf of women is demanded by women. In fact, demanded by feminists. That's what he for she is really all about, is demanding that men protect women and engage in anything from, criticism to outright violence in order to do it. So this idea of toxic masculinity, I don't think it really exists as feminists describe it. And I don't think it exists as a means of analyzing dysfunctional behavior and coming to conclusions about how to combat that dysfunction and how to better people's life choices. I think it really exists as a means of demonizing men for basically giving in to societal demands that are fueled more by women than anyone else.
Theron, did you want to hop in there?
Yeah, I have a problem with toxic masculinity when feminists talk about it. That's the real problem. Because they come from the point of, they start at the point that masculinity exists to oppress women, because masculinity is a product of patriarchy, and patriarchy is a design to oppress women. And if they kind of try to change the goalposts or tell you that that's not true, they're lying to you, because when they speak to their in-group, that's exactly what they say. When they're in their gender studies class, that's exactly what they say. So they start from that point that masculinity is designed to oppress women, but, like, in my opinion, it's just completely backwards. It's to impress women, like the peacock's feathers. if masculinity isn't what women want it to be, then it's no good, you know, because women are the gatekeepers. Um, so I don't think I don't mind talking about toxic masculinity, but I don't appreciate it from a feminist perspective.
Um, what I would posit would be what I would consider to be toxic masculinity, if we want to start talking about that, would be this tendency to attach to a position of assuming agency over, and this the central idea that you are responsible for everything, and that regardless of how a woman behaves, you are ultimately responsible for her behavior. Now, that may seem like it's sort of saintly, but in some ways, not granting women the consequences of their behavior is a slight against their personhood. So viewing women in terms of just being women, and having like I don't know, a universal respect for women regardless of the behavior that they choose as people, is a way of disrespecting women as people. And I would say that assuming responsibility for absorbing women's behavior, taking responsibility for women's behavior, and not allowing them the consequences of their actions, I would consider that to be toxic masculinity. And I think that there's something fruitful to talk about that, because not only does it hurt women, it also hurts men, and it's a dysfunctional way of approaching things, and it's the exact mirror correlate to what you see with toxic femininity, which is this belief that you are solely defined by how you're acted upon. This almost incredible ability to turn everything into an attack upon yourself, and to make other people responsible for your emotions, for the things that you experience, and responsible for changing them, even in situations where they can't possibly do anything. And that's, to my mind, is one aspect of toxic femininity that's really harmful for women, because when you abdicate your control over your own mental landscape, when you say I have to rely on somebody else to make me feel good, I have to rely on someone else, and I mean, to some degree we're social species, so we do rely on other people, but there's a certain point where that becomes completely unhealthy, and you can never, if you're constantly putting that locus control outside of yourself, you can never do what you can to improve your own circumstance. And in many cases, the only person who can improve women's circumstances is women themselves. So you're creating this never-ending cycle of misery, of men taking responsibility for women's emotions, but women are the ones who are creating those emotions, so men can't actually ever really do anything positive to change them. And the women are blaming the men for the fact that they can't do anything to help their emotions, and never seeing that the only way to step out of that cycle, the toxic cycle, is to say, no, actually, I am responsible for how I feel right now. And I am responsible for taking those necessary measures. Now, sometimes, yeah, sometimes you do need help. Sometimes you need somebody to say, hey, you know, this is wrong, or this is, let me give you a place to heal. But it's you who has to do the healing. You know, and it's not black or white. But at the same time, this idea that men are responsible for women's emotions, or anyone is responsible for a woman's emotions, is the kind of toxic femininity that I think really hurts women, and that, again, is the corresponding correlate to the toxic masculinity of assuming responsibility for things you can't possibly do anything for. You just it's not your responsibility, and assuming your responsibility means that you are actually making sure the problem will never get solved, because you can't solve it, but you're willing to accept the idea that you can, even though you can't. All right. Does anyone want to speak? Oh shoot! I did it again. I'm sorry, Brian.
No. I typed it after you started talking. So
Okay.
You didn't do the thing that you thought you did.
All right.
Oh, I was just okay. So if we accept that there exists an ability or an you know, a potential for women to exhibit toxic behavior, and we accept that there also is an ability for men to exhibit toxic behavior, then I wouldn't. I don't know that I would call it toxic femininity or masculinity at all. I would consider it just like individuals or people who can be, toxic in their behavior, and they're just using essentially what they have known about their sexuality to use it. I've been reading this book, and I think it's related. Um, I'm got to go back and look at the title. Esther Viller. She wrote a book called The Manipulated Man, and I'm about halfway through it, but I got to put it down sometimes because she says some really like mean shit about, women especially. And it's not that I'm, like, it doesn't feel as real as she's saying it. It's almost like, it's very, and it can come across as pretty brutal, but it is pretty interesting. An interesting book. And I guess what I'm thinking is that maybe it's more of a toxic individuals that are just using their femininity or masculinity to get their job done, but it's not necessarily something inherent to their sex. So I could be wrong. I'm totally open to that information.
I think you're right. I think you're right in the fact that it is toxic individuals who are using their sexuality to manipulate others or to do get the things done that they want in ways that harm themselves and others. But you do have to sort of step back and realize that there are certain toxic behaviors that are tolerated in women. They didn't used to be. They didn't used to be. There used to be all kinds of, your dad would warn you, she's a man-eater, just stay away from her, right? Like she won't do right by you, like you had parents who would warn you of that. That there are some women out there who are just toxic in very specific ways that correspond with what society is sort of willing to tolerate as far as bad behavior, right? You don't really see the same behaviors in men as much because they can't use them in the same way.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue a little bit with Brian on that. I do understand what you guys are saying. You're absolutely right. But I think we're talking about the way I use toxic femininity is, of course, we have the same thing as Tom mentioned, that 75% of people are of a gender a certain way, and then there's 25% are outliers. So a lot of the women that are here on this podcast are not typical women, and the men that are here are also not typical men. But when we're talking about brain patterns and very masculinized brains versus very feminized brains, there are certain behavioral patterns that actually complement each other, but are very different, yin and yang. It actually is very true. So what they talk about when toxic masculinity is when they're aggressive, narrow-minded, like very goal-oriented to exclusion of emotion. That's very hyper-masculinized brain that very rarely exists in reality unless men are forced to be that way because women will not accept anything else from them. And that's where toxic femininity comes in, because women have an ability to shit in your soul. They have an ability to nitpick. They have a way to have amorphous arguments that are not logical to trap you in some sort of guilt thing. So all of those things are toxic femininity by virtue of the way female brains work. And so I feel like we are talking about two slightly different things. There are people who use their sexuality in a toxic way, but there are also ways in which human brains work that, if left to be hyper-feminized or hyper-masculinized, is just unbalanced. It doesn't work for our current situation. It doesn't work to be gregarious animals and interact with each other properly. It's something that is very harmful because of just basic brain patterns that differentiate men and women. And I really like the term toxic femininity in a way that it pushes, because when SJWs talk about toxic masculinity, it's something that affects women. It's something that affects everyone and is terrible. Well, toxic femininity, I think of in the same way. It is something that affects everyone and affects men. Women do have a desire for a they say they want one thing, but then they reward a different behavior. And a lot of times I personally have seen men denigrated and disrespected unless they become cavemen. They have to literally be like threatening to beat someone in order to get respect. So in that sense, I feel toxic femininity is actually driving toxic masculinity at this point, because we have had evidence, and personally I know this about men, they are actually gregarious, loyal, communal. In fact, men can form groups and bond much better than women can. Women are allies, they're not friends. They betray each other at the drop of a hat. We're talking about typical, social minded, manipulating type, women, the toxic femininity. So that's, I feel like, yeah, exactly, mean girl. So there is an element that has to do with biology as well. So I would throw that out there.
Okay, well, I need to fill in for Brian. So until he comes back from wherever the Doge is, whatever the Doge is doing.
When he comes back, tell him to put the exploded Doge on the screen, because
I don't think he can.
My toxic femininity is really annoyed that I haven't seen that yet.
Okay, well, I'll tell him to maybe put up the Photoshop thing that he did with the exploding Doge. I don't think he can actually use it as an icon. But the other thing I wanted to sort of get into with toxic femininity, and I totally agree that in many cases toxic femininity is a driver of toxic masculinity. I'm not sure, and in some ways I think also toxic masculinity can be a driver of toxic femininity, because you have men who are raising girls, in some cases, to be princesses who do not take responsibility for their emotional landscapes.
You have men enabling women, too, in their bad behavior.
Yeah, so there's sort of a...
There were men in the audience of what was it, some late-night talk show that had Lorena Bobbitt on, and there were men in the audience applauding her as well, not just women, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you cut his dick off, woo, good for you,
Anyway, I'm not actually groaning at Karen. I'm groaning at what is she saying.
We know.
Do you want to go, Kenna? We're still waiting.
I was just waiting to. I thought you were still talking.
Well, I am still talking. But I'm trying to.
She's filling dead air because Brian teased out on us.
Oh,
okay.
He's
dead to us. No, I am trying to finish a thought, but now I'm trying to extricate it from the rat's nest of my brain. Just give me a second. I'll do this. I think that toxic masculinity drives toxic femininity. I think ultimately this is, in some cases, an abusive relationship can be a dynamic that both people are creating. And you can intervene to actually improve the dynamic, to create anger, dealing with anger skills, dealing with conflict skills, and to say that either gender is in particular responsible, I would say is not relevant to finding a solution. Pointing blame is not relevant to finding a solution.
No, I would say, though, that pointing at the patterns of behavior, because there are different patterns of behavior between men and women, even in abusive relationships, even when they abuse each other, as far as, they're both mutually combative, and they both say that they're doing it for the exact same reason, they'll have different patterns of escalation and different patterns of engagement and different patterns of all of this stuff because of the fact that they're different people. One's a man, one's a woman. So I think it's definitely pointing blame is maybe not a good thing, but recognizing that these two patterns of behavior and sort of propensities can express differently between men and women, and that they're tolerated differently between men and women is just, I think that's something that actually is a good thing to discuss. So
I think it's also important the recognition that they feed on each other is a vital thing. And I guess you would kind of call that a codependency, and it's something I've mentioned before. Like when we discussed a while back, we discussed a Tumblr post that Aaron Gianni had made about his sort of the history of abuse that he'd experienced and how he responded to it. And one of the things I've pointed out before, and I'll point it out again and again, is when you are in a situation where you're being subjected to somebody else's dysfunction to a level where it is abusive, or it's impacting severely or strongly on your life like that, you develop coping mechanisms, and your coping mechanisms feed into that because you're accommodating the dysfunction in order to avoid having the more extreme end of it impact on you. You accommodate your abuser's whims. You accommodate your abuser's basically your abuser's idiosyncrasies and demands in order to avoid being punished. And what that basically does is make you an easier target. And the same thing is going to be true with these two areas of dysfunction that feed on each other, where you have one side, the masculine side, enabling a hypoagency, and you have the feminine side enabling hyperagency and sort of pushing hyperagency. It creates a situation where, in order to feel more not just attractive, but fitting of the expectations of the opposite sex, each sex is going further and further into that dysfunction to be more and more. They're defining their gender identity based on the most dysfunctional aspects of what they're being taught by each other is attractive. And it's not necessarily that these are aspects of your gender that are defining of your gender. There are many other things about being male and female that are defining characteristics that have nothing to do with dysfunction. There are perfectly functional defining characteristics of both sexes. But if you end up in a situation where the only thing that gets recognized as a defining characteristic and as an admirable or even just an appreciable characteristic of the gender is the dysfunction, then you end up with this situation, with this codependency and this complete cycle of dysfunction feeding on dysfunction and pushing dysfunction and increasing dysfunction. And you end up at a situation like today where we have various people in the feminist and the social justice end of politics trying to create thought-free safe spaces to avoid confronting the dysfunctional nature of their advocacy, because it's gotten so bad that it's blatantly obvious. You don't even have to examine it. You just barely have to scratch the surface. And so they can't allow any free thought, or the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, and just to speak a little bit more towards to what I was saying about blame. I think casting blame is sort of a feminine thing, a toxic femininity in and of itself, and saying that this person is to blame rather than saying what responsibility you have. And what I mean by responsibility is when you have responsibilities, you have the ability to change the situation. I think right now women have more responsibility in this situation. I don't want to say blame, but they have more responsibility. And the reason why I don't want to say blame is about almost like a permanent rejection of a particular person. You say that they are the reason for the problem, and then you subsequently reject them.
It's also focusing on the past instead of being like, okay, mistakes were made. Let's look at how we can move forward.
Yeah, let's look at how we can influence the situation to achieve our goal, which I think is a more masculine, usually, way of looking at things.
Well, of course it is, because accountability is imposed on men.
Yeah.
And it can be pointed out right now we're just in a position of better capability of dealing with it. We're in a position of better capability of affecting change.
Yeah, we're in a position where now when women engage in toxic feminine behaviors, they can't run away from them because many of them are engaged in mediums where they are written down and remain. And it's like I recently on a show, it was a study was done into different societies and different mediums of communication. The more permanent a medium of communication is, the less you can lie in it, and the less people lie. So people apparently in the past lied more. Now that we have email and permanent forms, we communicate in permanent ways, there's a permanent record of our communications, people can't lie as easily. And a lot of these dysfunctional female behaviors rely on this idea that a record, it disappears. They don't have to take responsibility for going through a whole bunch of different scenarios to try and find the one that fits and makes a person assume a position of guilt. Like, and you can see the entire process, and you can point it out, and it's there, it's written, and you can't walk away from that because it's under your name. So now we have the ability, because this mirror called the internet is being picked up and being shown. Women are seeing themselves for the first time. They're seeing what they're doing, and they cannot escape it. And this is a situation that I don't think has existed in the past.
Well, I think this might actually be why there's such a huge, like sort of a burgeoning victimhood cult going on right now with feminism, is because maybe women are seeing themselves for the first time and they don't like it, and it's somebody else's fault. They're a victim of it.
I'm going to take exception with one thing. I don't think people lie less. I think they lie with less impunity. And there's a difference. Basically, you did explain, you did explain what the difference is, that it is more visible now and it's more detectable when people lie because there's a record of what they've said. But I think it still happens. Hell, the Jackie story, that was somebody lying. It simply was that she lied without that ability to lie with impunity. That she was examined, basically, and when she was subject to examination, she was found to be lying, and that's a totally different thing than less dishonesty. I don't know that whether it'll lead in the future to greater the greater transparency will lead to greater honesty, or whether it's going to lead to greater fight between people that want to censor the internet and people who don't. But that's really the situation, is that we are now seeing with greater clarity just how these lies are used. And what level of power they have. The other thing I wanted to point out is when I said women are in a better position to do this, we have greater social influence. That is what puts us in that better position. It's not just that we have greater, now easier to detect that we can't run away from it. Women have had that position of influence in society where we sort of set the trend of what's acceptable in society and what's polite and what's normal and so on. And feminists complain as if men dictate that and push that on women, but it's women who are really the social police, and it's women who are really the thought police. And because of that, it's women who have the power to turn around and look at the cycle of self-perpetuating dysfunction and put a stick in the wheels and say, it's time to stop. We're going to stop right here, and then we're going to turn it back. And we're the only ones that can do it.
I just wanted to do one brief correction before I hand the study did say that lying decreases depending on how much the medium retains. So if they have to face their lies, they lie less. But I mean, I don't know. We can't necessarily extrapolate it to the entire society, but in the context of the study.
Well, but it also calls into, like, it makes it, the whole thing makes me wonder, right? Like, okay, it shines a new light on the whole Hillary Clinton deleting her emails after using her own server rather than the government server thing, right? There's that. Right. Obviously, she felt free to say whatever she wanted in those emails because she was running them illegally through a private server and not a government one. And it also makes me wonder what Jackie sees when she looks in the mirror, because that whole episode had to have been like the most grandiose exercise in toxic femininity I think I have ever seen. It is every single stereotype of negative stereotype of a woman playing itself out on the public stage. A weak, insecure, feeble, naive, helpless damsel who is really an attention whore, right? Who's willing to lie about, because she's been scorned, right? And all of these tropes that are biblical in nature. These tropes about women and the dangers of women, the potential dangers of women who are not good. There are women and then there are good women, and she was not a good woman. All of the negative stereotypes played out brilliantly in that. Playing the victim in order to get attention, and all of this other stuff, not caring about who she harmed, throwing her friends under the bus, everything, right? Like, all of those are toxic behaviors that are stereotypically through history applied to women, right? The woman who doesn't stand by her man, the woman who is scorned and held hath no fury, and the woman who is fickle in her affections and fickle in her friendships, the woman who is narcissistic but naive and blah 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 blah. I like just so unbelievably like you couldn't write fiction that fits all of those tropes and have people buy it. I couldn't write a novel about Jackie, about a woman named Jackie who had that happen to her, and have people believe it. Right? They'd say, "Oh my God, this is just too much. It's just too many tropes."
Enough gossip.
It's not gossip.
Is it
All right.
not?
No,
okay,
well,
Theron has been waiting patiently.
Okay, Theron, go ahead.
Well, I think it's important that we talk about how when toxic masculinity and toxic femininity interact, the situations in which they interact. For example, like intimate partner abuse. Everybody here knows it's reciprocal, and I feel like a lot of toxic gendered behavior plays into situations like that. And obviously, right now, we're attending to domestic violence as a manifestation of toxic masculinity. And I think that's a really big hole that the men's movement can fill by pointing out, not necessarily blame, as we established, but at least pointing out the responsibility that women have and the toxic gendered behavior that they engage in. But obviously I feel like it's probably going to have to be women pointing that out. And just the internet kind of turning around the mirror and having women have a look at them. Just like a general comment that I would get from a man versus a woman who disagrees with my opinion online is a man would say, you ugly tranny faggot, go die in a ditch. A woman would say, no matter how hard you try, you will never be a woman. And guess which one hurts the most? If it would hurt, it doesn't really hurt me.
Oh, I can imagine just the very, very calm. It's always the quiet, cutting remark that just slices you in half. It's not the rabid dog who like yells names at you that hurts. It's just the person who very.
And that's the female way of insulting. If you watch any makeup tutorial, and I love watching makeup tutorials, it's my guilty pleasure. The women are brutal. They are absolutely brutal. I do not want to be insulted by a woman. I'd much rather be insulted by a man.
Oh, me too. Absolutely. Men are at least honest, right, in their insults, and they do it in a way that, like, women can insult you in a way that only you know that you were like. So they'll say something in front of an entire room full of people, and you're the only one who knows that they've just, like, shoved a knife in you. Right? You and that other woman, you're the only ones who are even aware of what's going on. Everybody else is like, oh, they're just making polite conversation. No, women are like, they can be brutal about even just like the subtle backstab in front of everybody that nobody notices except for the stabber and the stabbee.
It's reverse Blarney. It's
Oh,
it's like the exact opposite. Like men, and Blarney, you could say
bombastic.
Blarney was created by men.
Yeah,
It's a
bombastic.
masculine way of complimenting people that is as creative as humanly possible, and that finds the most like the most flattering way and kind way to and tactful way to say something that if you are tactless in expressing it would be taken as an insult even if it was intended otherwise. And where the feminine style of insulting is the art of taking the uninsulting, the ordinary, the perfectly acceptable, and turning it into, or even the compliment, the neg,
Yeah.
turning it into something evil and cruel and heartless. Um, things like, I could never pull an outfit like that off. I would not be able to walk out in public in that, but it looks good on you. It
uh,
looks fabulous on you. You know, and I've had that one turned on me quite a bit. Um, and it's actually like women make it their mission in life to tear each other down,
yeah. You're
not
gonna.
just
I'll give you a compliment that subtly undermines your confidence.
yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. That's the most like Anna says in the chat here, it's the most interesting hairstyle. Not a
Mm,
pretty hairstyle, not a beautiful hairstyle, not a good hairstyle, just interesting. And it's done so frequently and so it's so ingrained into female behavior that it becomes difficult for women to honestly compliment each other without doing that by accident or without it being taken that way, because a woman is so used to when another woman gives a compliment that that's what she's doing.
Well, going back to the male-female dynamic on this, that's basically the mechanism that women developed evolutionarily as a defense mechanism. Men had the strength, while women had to combat with something equally as crippling, and so they go for the Achilles heel, like the most sensitive part. They sense it out. Because they're really good at social mind thinking that we're talking about just in the Game Overlord show. And the interesting thing on this to me is that I will agree with radical feminists on one thing: men are stupid. And what I mean by that is that it's finally men are starting to realize that there is this mental landscape in which women wage war. Before, men were slightly clueless. They didn't really conceive of the fact that you could be using words as weapons. For men, words are communication tools. It's something to convey data. Women do not use words to convey data ever. They use it to manipulate. Well, most women, in the toxic femininity women that we're talking about, they use words to manipulate others' thoughts and manipulate their feelings. It is not to convey information. And for the longest time, men did not realize that they were being waged war against in this mental landscape. And they just thought that, well, the only time you can get hurt or the only thing is bad is physical, violence, or that's the only way you can affect someone. No, there's all these constructs that women have created that against men and against other women, that men are suddenly starting to wake up and realize that, wait a minute, there's this whole social, more feminized kind of way of thinking about things that we have been completely clueless about and that we've been affected by without even realizing. So a lot of times men will get frustrated and angry and they have no idea why, because they can't quite pick out the subtle emotional abuse that women are giving them, and they just feel angry and they don't know why and they lash out. And of course, the public sees the male lashing out. They never see the woman hounding him every second of the day in the home.
That's something now I remember the thing that I wanted to talk about earlier, that I forgot when we got to talking about the way women insult, and it was about agency and the reciprocity of domestic violence. I don't think people realize how much of domestic violence is two-way, because the narrative that's been promoted for the last 50 years or so is, male on female domestic violence as the thing that happens. It's the guy that goes out and gets drunk and comes home and beats his wife in front of his kids, and she's never done anything wrong. And the movie.
No, he beats her because she bitches at him for being drunk.
Well, it's or she criticizes his behavior or whatever. But the reality is, we have a dynamic in society that causes this. It is a primary cause, I think, and it's the fact that from the time they are small children, girls are taught that they are entitled to slap or hit boys or men if they are offended, just from being angry about what was said, not physically attacked, not in real, honest-to-God self-defense. They're taught that if a man says the wrong words to them, if he doesn't watch his mouth, if he doesn't know his place, they can slap him to put him in it. That teaches girls to respond to their emotional, internal workings with external violence towards another person. They are taught to hit when they are angry. And men and boys are taught that there's no circumstance that justifies hitting a woman. So when they get, and they're taught to view women as harmless. So when a woman does start hitting them, when they're in a situation where a woman is mad and she's pushing and she's shoving and she's getting up in their face and she's yelling, nasty things at them and poking them in the chest and completely making every possible effort to trigger their fight or flight response, that they exercise the most supreme self-restraint, because they they're basically subject to a taboo, and it is as strong of a taboo as the taboo against engaging in sexual relations with somebody underage or against eating human flesh. Men and boys are so shamed over any potential violence against women and girls that quite frequently fathers will leave discipline of the daughters to their wives in more conservative families. They won't spank their daughters even if they will spank their sons. And it's to the level where it pains a lot of guys to even consider it.
And
so
it
you
also
have a
promotes
situation.
fragility of women. The idea that
So
women are fragile.
So you have a situation where you have one gender that feels entitled to hit with the expectation that there will be no repercussions, and the other gender that feels responsible for putting up with it. Eventually, you get to the point where one of them is going to push the other over the edge. And if that becomes the goal, if a woman decides that she wants to get a reaction out of a guy, she knows how to do it, and she will just keep at it until she gets it.
I was having a conversation with a feminist friend of mine the other day, and she was talking about the whole boys will be boys phenomenon and how feminists view it, which I think is completely wrong. And how when she was young, boys would like express that they like her or that they have like feelings for her by like being physical with her or hitting her or something. Like non-sexual, like hitting or like being rough and tough. Or hair pulling, yeah, and she apparently said that the teacher said nothing because, quote, boys will be boys, and basically she was making the point that this translates into later life, that it normalizes violence against women and domestic violence, and then moments later she boasts about how when she was young she was hitting her brothers and her male friends, and then when they would consider hitting back she would be like, no, I'm a girl, you can't do that. And I'm just like, the hypocrisy. How does that work?
Absolutely. I was actually, I did want to talk about a couple of things with regarding what Hannah said about, sort of the endless provocation, the chest poking and the hitting, the shoving and the yelling and the belittling language that a lot of women use in order to provoke a reaction, right? Now, feminists will say that being stoic and unemotional is toxic masculinity, but being stoic and unemotional, or having mastery over your emotions, is the only thing keeping men from like pounding those women the very first time the finger hits the chest, right? It's really the thing that keeps men from reacting with violence to those violent instigations, right? So toxic masculinity is what keeps men from beating their wives. And and another thing that I wanted to bring up too, when with the women's ability to manipulate, and Anna touched on it with, and it really is sort of a compensation for the lack of physical strength compared to men that women have, and so the most successful women, the ones who could survive best and provide for their children best in the world, and make sure that they had things very, very well, and had a sort of a handle on their lives, had control over their lives and their families and their men, were the best at emotionally manipulating their men's masculinity in order to get him to be, proxy agent on her behalf. They were the Lady Macbeths who were able to undermine their husband's masculinity until he did what they wanted. Some of what I think, as far as the women's only spaces, right? And the absolute objection to men's only spaces on the part of feminists and the part of actually probably most women, sort of, well, why should men have a space to themselves? I think that is actually, it's almost like women want to interact with each other in where men can't see them and men can't observe what they do and how they are, right? And yet they don't want, it's almost like they feel like, and if you ever listen to women, right, a group of women over coffee talking about their husbands, they're just fucking brutal, right? They're absolutely brutal. I can sit at a table in a bar and listen to guys, right, talking in a bar. They think nobody's listening, and I'm listening in, and they're not shit-talking their wives. If they have anything negative to say about their wives, it's like, oh man, she's mad at me again, and then they're like, oh, yeah, it's too bad, man. They'll make the odd snide comment like, oh, well, where's the old lady, as they say in Alberta. Where's the old lady? Oh, she's probably at the lawyer's office. And they'll make a sarcastic comment like that, and that's the end of it. They don't shit talk their wives to each other the way women shit talk their husbands to each other.
Maybe they should start shit-talking their husbands. I mean, their wives. Because as you said, Karen, like, there's no collective male experience. All men are islands. It's like men don't realize that what happens to them because they are men.
Yeah.
And maybe if they start shit-talking their wives, they'd start realize this is a thing that men experience, and it's not okay.
Yeah, the closest thing they do is they start joking about taking each other's man card when men get married and basically, become responsible for families and start acting like they're responsible for families because they are. But they won't. They do it in a jokingly, razzingly, congratulatory almost kind of way. Oh, I'm taking your maid card. You got to go home. After you can't just go out drinking with the rest of us. Well, I'm taking your maid. It's not. It's almost like just watching it happen. It's almost like and not necessarily an envious thing, but a way of saying, congratulations, you're an adult. And at the same time, it's like, oh, that sucks. You can't, go have fun with us. We're sorry that that's the way it is, but, we understand. Women have a totally different attitude toward that. But what I really wanted to touch on was something, from back before discussing the aspects of domestic violence. I wanted to point out, when I've previously brought up the issue of the dynamic between women being taught to hit when they're angry and men being taught that there's never a circumstance under which it's okay to hit a woman, a lot of people get very offended. They don't even have to be feminists necessarily to get offended by that, because it's such an ingrained and common belief in society that women are small and weak and men are big and strong, and therefore men are expected to maintain that level of stoicism, and they're never genuinely threatened when a woman gets up in their face and she's poking at them and pushing on them and irritating and, you know, shocking and so on, and won't leave them alone and backs them into a corner and bow! And those reflexes aren't necessarily something that you can just ignore. And at the minute that you jump because somebody yelled, you have to understand, when you get a man into a corner or you block his ability to run away from you when you are abusing him, you put him in that same situation. You trigger a reflex. And feminists use the word trigger like it's tissue paper. They'll talk about being triggered because somebody used a word they didn't like, or they'll talk about being triggered because somebody had free thought when they didn't think free thought should be had. But they will not acknowledge that you can trigger a self-defense reflex by pushing and pushing and pushing until somebody can't take it anymore. Personally, I think that's pretty sick. I would call that abusive. And I'd actually call it an act by feminists of abusing an entire gender. And I would call it deliberate, because for 50 years they have been hiding evidence that this happens. Like, they're not unaware of it.
No, they're not.
They've had the statistics, they've had the information, they've had surveys, they've had police reports, they've had everything. And they lied to Congress in the 70s, and they've lied to the public for 50 years, and they've deliberately tried to get people to ignore that happens.
Well, what drives me crazy about the whole thing is that you have feminists who are essentially demanding of men, right? I mean, like, because the law demands it of them. Because the moment they raise a hand to their wives, they're going to jail. So the law that was written by feminists demands this of men, that they be stoic, that they master their emotions, that they never lose control, right? No matter how much provocation their wife is or their girlfriend is dishing out, no matter how much she's hitting him, no matter how much she's refusing to allow him to leave, no matter how much she's throwing at him, telephones and fucking vases and dinner plates, right? Doesn't matter what she's doing, you cannot raise a hand to her. You have to maintain control over your emotions. You have to be stoic, right? And then they turn around and they call the expectation of stoicism toxic masculinity.
There's a lot of hypocrisy.
There really is. And I was actually just wondering, like, if I could just finish my thought, because it was on the female only and male only spaces. I think that honestly, women don't want men to see what they do when they get alone together, and I think that a lot of their resistance to the idea of male only spaces is because they assume men behave that way. They assume men talk that way, and they assume men share, tips and tricks on how to manipulate their women into, getting, breakfast in bed every morning or some shit, right? Like, how to make their women subservient. Oh, yeah, these men are, like, talking about their wives the way women often talk about men. I mean, like, there are no books out there called How to Train Your Woman with the tips from the world's top dog trainers, right? But there is a book like that about how to train your man with tips from the world's top dog trainers, right? This is the way women see fucking men, and this is the way they talk about them when they're alone together quite often. And I think that they think that when men get together all by them, they're lonesome, that's what they're doing, right? And it's so not.
I've always wanted to go sit in the women's center because it's a female only space, and luckily they're welcome to trans women. I've always wanted to go sit there and just hear what the fuck these women talk about when there are no men there, because I think there's a lot of misandry.
Can I? I just want to get in there for one comment about the women who talk about their partners behind their back to other women. You chose them. You're essentially just insulting yourself.
Yeah, they're not going to see it that way. And what really drives me crazy is, like, there is such a thing as venting to a friend, right? You're having problems with your partner, or your partner did something really shitty to you, or whatever, right? And there's such a thing as venting. There's such a thing as sharing that, and you maybe talk about it, and your friend tells you, well, it's just like really not that big a deal. I know it feels like a big deal, but he's good in all these other ways, right? And so, like maybe this is just some little quirk of his personality that you're gonna have to learn to live with, or whatever, right? You know, there is that kind of thing that people do and that women do, but I have I have sat on the sidelines of groups of women who all they did was bash their men, just like bash, 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 bash. And these are men, these are decent men, like absolutely 100% decent, responsible, loyal, faithful men, right? But oh, they don't do this right, or they leave the cap off the fucking toothpaste, or whatever, and it's like now I gotta bash him for half an hour to my friends, and it's just kind of gross.
Okay, it's actually Brian's turn to speak, but he's opening and closing doors for some reason.
Okay, I have something to say.
Wait, Brian just... Okay.
Oh, did he come back?
Yeah, he came back. But then he gets back.
Is he... Can I talk?
It's like the boat... It's like the Schrodinger's Doge.
Talk, Theron, because he's...
I'm going to talk.
Yeah.
I have no problem with female-only and safe spaces as long as there are male-only safe spaces. And I don't mind there being a lot of vitriol in female-only safe spaces. Let it out. Let your man-hating out. I'm sure a lot of women have bad experiences with men and makes them just want to shit on men. And that's okay. Get it out. But let men do the fucking same. And at this point, the only safe space... in the past, men had safe spaces at work because it was a boys' club, and it was like safe spaces where they could just express masculinity, talk smack, whatever. Now the internet is the only safe space for men. And, men let out exactly what women let out in these female-only safe spaces. But now it's seen as internet misogyny and whatever. It can't just be seen as, men doing exactly what women do, except women do it in private. Men do it online because it's the only safe space that they have. So, yeah.
Okay, Brian. We're leaving an opening for you. I'm waiting. Are you going to unmute? Is this going to happen? I don't know. It seems like Brian is having trouble with the mute button. He was just a while back. You were having trouble with your background too. It was like there was a background error. There we go.
No, I'm here. I didn't catch what Theron said. Ignore the Doge for now. I'm having a problem with the camera, but
it's quite the expression.
Yeah, that's why he looks blank. So I was just gonna say that I think I do have a bit of an idea about what kind of stuff goes on in these, when women are, sort of like gathering in a single space. I think that you got a kind of a preview of that when we were at Calgary Expo and you went to that first panel, and the women there wanted to basically talk about men and men's rights activists, and I think that is actually kind of a giveaway about what kind of stuff goes on, that could go on there. And that was basically the main thing I wanted to say. There was something else, but I lost my train of thought because my camera fell and I had to go pick it up. But that was something that I was thinking was, because they thought that they were in what they would consider to be a safe space to discuss, their issues with male comic nerds, men's rights activists. Basically, they were talking about women in a male space, and the MRA comment was just kind of a side comment because they were mainly just talking about men in general or their encounters or their experiences. And to be quite frank, you have to ask yourself what direction would the conversation have gone if you hadn't stood up and said, I'd like to field that question. I think that one of the reasons why they got so upset was because they no longer had felt as though they were well, I guess to put it in their words, free. Well, they didn't feel like they were free to just bash on people that weren't there.
Yeah, they weren't safe to shit talk people behind their backs.
Pretty much, yeah, and I think that's what they wanted to do.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that they didn't really want me to stand up and or ask and say, hey, can I field that question? Do you want to actually see what you're talking about? You want to see a person who is part of this group that you're talking about? And I don't think they were expecting that. Um, and when I stood up and talked, like yeah, I probably did by just existing, I probably ruined their day.
Yeah. Another thing is to sort of like comment on what you guys were saying about sometimes it's good to vent. I think that another reason that maybe women might vent to female friends or even male friends that like want to be that sort of shoulder to cry on or their little emotional tampon or whatever is basically sometimes they do it because if they want to talk to their significant others or their husbands or their boyfriends about their problems, it's male nature to want to address problems, not just talk about problems. And so when a man says, okay, so what do we do about it? A woman will get angry and she'll say, I just want to talk, I just want to vent, I just want you to listen to me. And the guy is like, but I just want to fix it. And I think that is another, like if it's frustrating that men are always trying to fix everything, and sometimes women want to sort of revel in their, in their suffering or their frustration or whatever, it doesn't really, it's not constructive because the man's not giving them what they want, which is their ability to emotionally dump whatever it is they're feeling, on the given situation. Oh, I'm blue. On a given situation. And I think that is essentially the reason why they probably go to their girlfriends to do it. But at the same time, a male space is, I think it's, a way for guys to bond and sort of like, talk about not even talk about their problems, but rather, they want to talk about solutions, actually. I think that there is, like Karen has the anecdote about two guys fishing when they're, like having a lot of issues or a lot of problems. And they won't really talk about it much, but then they might just say yep, and that's basically the conversation. That's how they bond. But there's also times where guys will actually be like, I have this problem, and the other guys just want to solve the problem because we just want to move forward with it. So I think that is I think that's another thing.
I think I can explain that. Oh, sorry, Hannah.
Well, I wanted to point out that is what makes it so difficult for men to have safe spaces. It's like when women create a safe space, they create a space to sit around and do nothing but talk, and they want an echo chamber, and quite frequently it creates I would say a toxic level of a sense of helplessness.
Yeah.
Like all you can do is talk. You can't offer any solutions. And like those that are a little gender atypical, it's very frustrating to go into a space like that. And because like when I have when I vent to friends about a problem, I actually am looking for solutions, but I've got friends that are afraid to offer them because I'm female. But
yeah, and they're also, I'm sorry, they're also afraid to take accountability for maybe their part to play in it or what they may have done to contribute. This is why you have this, I don't want to be blamed because, like you said, as I said earlier,
because you take my advice and and it doesn't work, which and then a lot of women, if they do take advice and it doesn't work out, and maybe it doesn't work out because they don't take all of it, but they take the part they like, but they think they've taken the. I've had people do this to me, and it's really frustrating. They'll pick out the little bit of the advice that they're comfortable with, and they'll ignore an important aspect of it, and then they'll come back and they'll be like, "Well, I tried what you said, but it didn't work." And then they'll describe the situation, and it's like, "Well, no, you didn't try what I said. You tried your own version of it, and it didn't work because you left out this, and this is a vital part of it." But the reason that men have, I would say one of the reasons that men may have difficulty creating safe spaces for themselves is because they create spaces where they are doing things. They're not just sitting around and talking. They're not just creating an echo chamber, and they're not just venting. They're creating things like hacker spaces. They're creating gaming groups. They're creating fishing clubs or whatever, where a whole 6 or 8 guys go out fishing together on a regular basis, and inevitably, because when they do it, they do something fun or interesting while they are dealing with whatever issues come up, some woman will come along and want to become a part of it, and she has to come in and change things to suit herself. And it is no longer a safe space. They can no longer just be themselves because they have to be what men have to be in front of women. And they can no longer vent or look for solutions to problems because those are things that may offend her. And the next thing you know, you've got chicks coming in and like has been described before, hanging up their curtains and feminizing the place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's every single time men try to have something for themselves, women do this. And it's not that men are wrong for doing it that way. It's that women are wrong for not allowing them to have a place to just be guys.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question was, but you basically said it. I was gonna say this is why men, when a woman decides to be a part of something that men have, like maybe it's just a small group of friends, male friends, and then the one male friend brings his girlfriend, like his new girlfriend, to join in as a part of their hobby or whatever it is they're doing. All the other male friends, they will become anxious because they don't feel like they can be themselves anymore, and they're worried, even if they don't know her, and that she's is going to start essentially asking for changes, or maybe she doesn't really have an interest in being there, but rather she's just there because he's there, and the guys are that makes them nervous, that makes them anxious.
Well, of course it does. But like honestly, as a woman who spends a whole lot of freaking time with guys, you don't like all you have to do, and this is all I have ever had to do, is just try to fit in with the group, right? Like just adjust my language to its most salty, as opposed to its least salty, which is when I'm visiting my mother, and just allow these guys to be guys, and you don't take anything personally, and you don't ask them to change how they do things. You don't ask them to change their behavior. You just become. It's really like being a shit poster on 4chan. You just blend into the group, and you don't demand if you can actually stick it out for a few times and not make any demands and let them know or lead them to believe that you're not going to demand that they change their behavior, you're not going to demand that they clean up their language, you're not going to demand that they not make dirty jokes or what and let them know that they can razz you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the reasons why I tell that joke, about my boyfriend calling me Kevin, is because it lets other guys know that I can take those kinds of jokes, that I actually find them funny,
Yeah,
right?
well, and that's actually the reason why a lot of guys do bring their girlfriends around, because they want to see how if the girl that they're with is going to integrate well with their friends. So it's just we're speaking in generalities here, but if the girl comes into like when a girl and a guy are dating, we're just looking at this particular example. We know that both parties, if they're really interested in the other, will alter their behavior to an extent in order to because they want that person to like them. And after a while, you want like their women will do shit tests
Yeah,
sometimes,
well, and you don't
guys,
want to
right?
be on your best behavior anymore
Yeah.
after a while.
But then, like, what guys will do is they'll be like, "Well, I'm gonna bring you around my friends now," and see if her behavior can persist, in that way. If she can be just one of the guys, because in a lot of ways, most guys want a girl that's also like one of the guys, that they can be themselves around and be really comfortable around and not have to walk around on eggshells and essentially, you know. Essentially they have to like be someone who they are not, remain in their as Chris Rock would put it, he call it, you don't meet the person, you meet their representative, and after a while you want to like wean that off is what most people do. So speaking in generalities, I think that there is that. I think that's what guys do to test, but what it is it's not for guys. It's not really a shit test. It's more of a this is my world. I want to see how well you can integrate into my world, or are you going to ask my world to integrate around you? And that's basically the way that they go about doing that when they bring a girl around their guy friends or ask them to participate in their hobbies or whatever.
Yeah. Well,
And I would add, my name's in the chat.
All right, fine.
Off you go. I would add that I think men also give women, they allow women to have their space. They're not going to expect, even if they want the woman to actually integrate into their space, they're not going to expect her to give up what she enjoys in many cases. And if they do, they're controlling.
I've never been with a guy who was prepared to deny me things that fulfilled me just because of jealousy or he thought that.
Well, it's possible that there are men like that, but
Oh,
generally,
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there
generally
are.
that's an abusive case. So we're not talking about abusers. We're talking about the general state of just average men. I don't think guys probably appreciate it if a woman can go off on her own and just putter around and do shit. He doesn't have to entertain her. But I wanted to take a look at safe spaces, women's safe spaces. I don't actually think female safe spaces are even safe for women, because, and this is something that I've experienced. Women will go off and they will start talking about other women and affirming with each other that the woman that they're talking about is there's something, I don't know, she's got bad intent or ill intent, and then they create these almost like these this sort of like Cold War.
Yeah, no, it's totally like Cersei Lannister.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, so I don't even think that women's spaces necessarily are safe spaces for other women, because many cases it's like they're creating these fortresses of confirmation about their opinions about other women, and then they launch, attacks in female ways to women that they've identified as being problematic, as it were.
You don't even have to be absent for that to happen.
Yeah, no, and you know what's really bizarre too is that, like, in male spaces, like if you have like it takes a lot as a guy, right? So you say you have a small company, right, and there's like 15 guys working there, and they don't always get along, and they wouldn't necessarily hang out with each other, choose to hang out with each other after work, but they get along, right? And the hierarchy, the pecking order sorts itself out, right? And it's like a guy, sometimes it's fluid, but it's usually like one guy on the top and one guy on the bottom, and everybody ranks through the middle, right? But with women, it seems to be that it's a broader hierarchy. It's like a weird thing where it's like there's a top dog, everybody else is kind of in the middle, not ranked. And then there's one who's not the bottom. She's excluded. She's out. Not
Yeah, that's
part of the
me.
group.
that experience that really hits home. But that's not the only way that women's safe spaces hurt women. Women will create a safe space that they'll call a safe space, but they'll create a space where it is safe for them as a group to take the woman who does her own thing, the woman that the traditional, or the thinkers on, the whole alpha beta whatever thing would call Zeta, and convince her, or try to convince her, that she is broken and needs to be fixed, and that she is that her damage is somebody else's fault. This perceived damage that needs to be fixed is somebody else's fault, and she must blame this person and or group of people and hate them and adopt all of the behaviors that she doesn't cling to, and that come from toxic femininity, that you have to become the gossiper, you have to become the the manipulative shit tester, that the woman who seeks to use companionship as a bargaining chip instead of just an aspect of interaction with other people. And if you don't, if you can't, or are maybe you're not equipped to become that person, or you have no interest in becoming that person, it becomes a teardown session. You are the worst person in the world. You don't deserve to live. There's something inherently wrong with you. You should be institutionalized. Um, and of course, you're attacking this entire group of women that are talking to you. And you alone are the most powerful person in the world, and you're actually hurting everybody around you by being different. And it can be an incredible experience, because you get to this point, like you get, and in a situation like that, that type of abuse takes you to a breaking point where it's almost like being the lid on one of those jars, where if you screw it too tight, it snaps back down to the previous thread, and you hit that breaking point, and all of a sudden everything they say is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. You realize that you're never going to please these people and get to be yourself at the same time. And I'm not going to say that it stops hurting, because people say hurtful things to you, it hurts. But it stops mattering that it hurts, and it stops being a determining factor in your opinion of yourself. And you can slough it off and walk out of there knowing that you've just learned that you don't have to be part of a social group in order to be part of a community. It's but that's one of the ways in which female safe spaces can be very unsafe for women. It takes women who don't conform to a toxic standard of femininity and makes it a place of attack and a place of teardown. And you have to have a level of strength to be able to weather that. And I've seen other women broken by that, their spirits literally broken, and they become the woman at the bottom of the totem pole. They become the person that gets told by everyone else how to be. And that's basically the sort of attack that gets thrown at famous women who say, I'm not a feminist. It's the same kind of behavior, just more focused and less isolated. But when you see a famous woman, a singer, an actress, anybody that's really in a spotlight, come out and say, "Oh no, I believe in women's rights, but I'm not a feminist," and then a few weeks later, after a shitstorm of feminists contacting them, they come out, "Well, I didn't realize it, but I was a feminist." That's because they've hit that point where the lid snaps back, and instead, it has clamped down and choked the life out of them. And that's what's left, is the woman who capitulates. And that's when you really are broken.
I wanted to.
It's hard to follow up that. Isn't
I
it,
know.
Brian?
I hate following Hannah. It's like following fucking Jackie Mason or Roddy Dangerfield.
Stop following me, you stalker!
But I wanted to go. I'm gonna go back to toxic masculinity a little bit, because I'm trying to look at the mirror of toxic femininity, but I'm also trying to look at it through. I'm doing like a thought experiment in my head. Okay, so when feminists talk about toxic masculinity, they say things like essentially the destructive energy that is men, and the reason for it is because men are held to a very difficult, if not unreachable, standard of masculinity that requires them to feel nothing, and them to use violence and force to get what they want, and them to be ambitious, and them to suppress their feelings. without looking at it as a positive thing, like, or at least looking at the positive sides of things like stoicism and stuff that guys really like. And they leave it, what they leave open, that they think would be better, a better form of masculinity, are essentially traits that we consider to be feminine, like, talking about your feelings and crying and like hug circles and stuff like that, or maybe even just being non-traditionally masculine, like being effeminate or being not heterosexual, even, things like that. So if I look at the feminist definition of toxic masculinity and all of the damage that it can do, the one thing that, of course, that they never ever talk about is the reasoning behind what they do, which Theron touched on earlier in the show, which I think has a lot to do with women's response to masculinity, traditional masculinity. So when feminists talk about toxic masculinity, without actually bringing up femininity and its contribution to masculinity at all, then they are still taking essentially women out of the equation altogether, and they're acting as though whatever men do is something that happens in a vacuum, and it has nothing to do with women, and women don't in any way have any part to play in those actions. A good example of that would be the Elliot Rodger shooting, where they would, I think Jonathan McIntosh and Anita Sarkeesian said that this was basically an example of toxic masculinity at work, without considering the fact that his issues come from all different kinds of places, but their framing of it made it appear as though any man anywhere that's actually trying to be a man or likes being masculine, like I do, are prone to the same kind of terrible act. So I guess what I'm putting out there is that if we're looking at the feminist definition of toxic masculinity, then what would their definition of toxic femininity be if they were going to hold women accountable at all for for what they're talking about?
Holding women accountable, because toxic femininity would be internalized misogyny. So any situation where women hold each other accountable for their behavior, not for being weird, not for having awkward social skills, but for engaging in behavior that is toxic and abusive. If you hold women accountable for that, and I mean verifiably toxic and abusive, not oh, you're hurting my fifis. No, I mean like a pattern of behavior in which you destroy, or you
like Steph Guthrie. Just like if you act like Steph Guthrie.
Yeah.
Right? And some other woman holds you accountable. That other woman is suffering toxic femininity.
Yeah, and apparently toxic femininity is doing anything to benefit men, or to hold other women accountable, or to recognize women's agency is what they would call toxic femininity. And
when in reality, all that toxic masculinity is the demand that men be held accountable for everything.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that toxic masculinity, as defined by what Brian was saying, is it's their way of making all men responsible for Elliot Rodger. Instead of saying, hey, this is a negative behavior that men can engage in, and maybe it's good to examine it. Or, hey, this is a negative behavior that women can engage in, and maybe we should examine it and think about something, a more positive way to approach each other. They are using toxic masculinity not as a guideline to maybe improving behavior, but as a way of forcing guilt onto all men for the behavior of a few.
That goes back to...
Because they assume that masculinity has been constructed by men, that all masculine traits have been constructed solely by men. No, they haven't been. Women have contributed to them, and in reality, in a lot of ways, men impose more responsible aspects of maleness on each other, or at least they have throughout history, whereas, like you're going to make an honest woman of her, you're going to marry her, you got her knocked up, now you're going to do the right thing by her, all of those things that men force other men into, or pressure or impose on other men, right? This sense of honor and being honorable, particularly when it comes to women, right? And it's women these days who go off and bang some thug who already has 18 kids by 6 different baby mamas, right? Like, It's women who reward the guys who are irresponsible, who are womanizers, who are not going to do the right thing by them, right? They reward them by giving them sexual opportunities. So it's essentially toxic masculinity, right? Like this whole assumption that, oh, men won't stand by their girlfriends. Well, no, that's not an aspect of traditional masculinity. That's not an aspect of patriarchal masculinity. It was an expectation of men that they would do the right thing by her, right? And it's only now, since women decided that they don't have to be responsible in their sexual choices, that men are saying, well, she could have banged that other guy and not me. Like, it's only luck that that's my kid. Like, I don't know why I have to freaking deal with her now. I don't want to marry her. Like, it's
I will jump in to point out one thing, because you mentioned, banging guys with a bunch of baby mamas. That's not the guy necessarily abandoning the women and all of those situations at all. In fact, in the United States, there are more women who are single moms by choice than there are women who are single moms because they are divorced.
Yes, yeah, no, and the thing is that these women are not choosing to have sex with men who they want to settle down and form relationships with. They just want to bang whoever's the biggest badass on the block and have their single parent mother family, right? Women are not imposing healthy standards of masculinity on men through their choices anymore. They're actually rewarding unhealthy masculinity, and feminists do this too, right? Feminists
So,
absolutely do this.
Karen, are you saying there's some truth to the whole stereotype of women looking for the bad boys and then having kids with a man who can't commit and then raising bad boys and then the cycle continues?
Well, here's the thing. Is that when you're looking for evolutionary psychology, right? Okay, there's a set of hypotheses that have a significant evidence to back them up. So, say you're a man, you're looking for a long-term partner, right? And you meet a very promiscuous woman, but you're looking for a long-term partner, and her promiscuity is really not attractive to you, right? However, if you were just looking for like a one-night stand, her promiscuity is very attractive to you. Okay? Now, women, when they're looking for a long-term partnership, they're going to be looking for different traits in their partner than they are if they're looking for a one-night stand, just a casual hookup, right? Where they're in that case, they're going to maximize social dominance, genetic fitness. So we're talking muscles and swagger. That's what they're going to prioritize. That's what's going to attract them when it comes to hookups, right? That's why you see so many people going after, that's why Mick Jagger's banged like more than 4,000 people, is because he doesn't have looks, but he's got swagger and he's got social status, right? So essentially you have this situation where, based on what a woman is looking for, if she's looking for a long-term partner or if she's looking for a short-term hookup, she's going to have completely different criteria as to how she's choosing her partner. And because women don't need long-term partners the way they used to, they don't have to look for those. And it's much more exciting to go for the guy with swagger. If you know you're going to be okay, if you get knocked up, you know you're going to be okay because you got welfare and you got government enforced child support. The government will put the guy in jail if he doesn't pay. You're taken care of whether he's going to be a good father or not, right? So it's a much more attractive proposition for women to go for these bad boys now than it ever used to be.
I think also, there's another way of looking at this as well. Yeah, I got in there. There's a certain amount of intoxication that comes in the beginning of a relationship before the having to deal with each other sets in. And I think a lot of the women are choosing to just stay in that intoxicating beginning of a relationship and bail when it comes to dealing with the actual human being rather than, the inside of your own brain hormones.
Yeah, well, when you're they did studies. They put people in like MRI machines and they showed them photos, and like just very 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 brief, like a tenth of a second glimpses of like random photos, and in amongst, and these were all people who said, I have found the love of my life. This person is the love of my life. This person is the person that I am going to, be with forever, right? They took people who had met the quote love of their life a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, and people who had met the love of their life 5 or 10 years ago, right? They stuck them in an MRI. They showed them these pictures, and in amongst all of these random pictures, there was a picture of that person. And when that picture flashed for a tenth of a second, the people who were in that early phase, right? What fired up in their brain was like all of the super druggy dopamine responses and all of the flood of endorphins and all like really feel good chemicals, right? When it was people who were 5 to 10 years into a relationship, the parts of their brain that were triggered were the parts that have to do with empathy and compassion, right? And really loving that old pair of slippers because you're just used to them, right? And you don't, or having, feeling that you have when your shoes are wearing out, your favorite pair of shoes, and you don't want to get rid of them, but you're going to have to because you just love them because you've lived in them for 2 years, right? It was all of those feelings of familiarity and compassion and all of that, right? Those aren't exciting feelings. I mean, they're very good feelings, but they're not exciting feelings. They don't give you tingles.
Yeah, and everybody knows the Dr. Chuck Tingles. He knows where it's at. He knows where it's at. I wanted to actually introduce one last conversation topic in regards to toxic femininity, and this is something that I am very embarrassed to admit that I also do. I have very much worked on not doing it, but it's this idea of judging people's intentions and judging their intentions to be bad, and thus they become bad people. And I will admit that I have done this in the past, and it's something that I'm not proud of. It's sort of an ugly part of myself, and it's something that I see women do. That, I mean, instead of seeing everyone as just another human being trying to get along, another squirrel trying to get a nut, they will take behaviors or actions and they will spin them as a very very okay. Hannah's saying that's generally a human behavior. Okay, well, I've seen it more often with women. This idea that and specifically that a person, and you will just suddenly, like, I call it splitting black on them. And I'm thinking about my past relationships that I've had where I've done that, and for me, it's something that I wanted to throw out there for a conversation about that.
Well, that absolutely fits with the whole sort of toxic femininity meme, because if you look at personality disorders, particularly borderline and histrionic, they're much more predominant in women than in men. It's sort of like the opposite of the autism spectrum, where autism affects men way more than it does women, and then the other way around when it comes to these borderline and histrionic personality disorders. And one of the aspects of these disorders is that you have the black and white thinking, for sure. You're either my my very very best friend, or you're my worst enemy, and there is no in between. And woe betide somebody who is the bestest friend, because the moment you put your foot wrong, you are now the worst enemy. But it also involves like an overinterpretation of people's, like, the social cognition becomes pathologically overdeveloped, so that when you sit down and you ask somebody, well, why do you think John did that? And 90% of people will say, well, because Jane stepped on his foot and it hurt, right? And the borderline personality will say because he wanted to like hurt Jane and make her feel guilty or whatever, right? Um, like it's essentially an overinterpretation of intention, or even seeing intention where it doesn't exist. And this is extremely common with people with borderline, but it's also, if you look at sort of the autism spectrum as the extreme male brain, and the psychosis spectrum or personality disorders as the extreme female brain, you'll see it as a female trait. If women are better at empathy, at cognitive empathy, I don't think that they're any better at affective empathy, but at least at cognitive empathy. If they're better at it, then maybe sometimes they are too good at it for their own good. They overinterpret people's intentions. Um,
Did we lose Karen?
yeah.
Did we lose you there for a sec? Did anyone else? Did you drop out for anyone else?
Yeah, I heard it too.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
Okay.
it sounded like Karen fell down a well.
Okay,
we
well,
missed a
maybe we
sentence.
should
We missed maybe 2 sentences.
let Theron get in there and
Yeah.
you mute and unmute or do something. Re-rail yourself, woman.
Can you hear me?
Yes, but let's let Theron get her. Well, hopefully whatever's happening to you sorts itself out.
Yeah, I think women judge men's intentions horribly. I know I do, and I guess you could classify that as toxic femininity, because, like, if an old man talks to me on the bus, I immediately think, oh, creep, wants to, like, get in my pants or wants something from me. And it's completely unwarranted, because the poor man, I find, just wants to talk. He's probably like a lonely old man, and he has no one to talk to. And he probably finds it easier to talk to a girl than a guy. So that's a thing, and a lot of feminists' rhetoric is based, especially like manspreading and all that stuff. It's based on this notion that they find that men are creeps. Yeah, that's all I want. So and I've really been thinking very hard. What are my toxic behaviors, like toxically feminine behaviors? Because I don't know. I find being trans, like having been raised a boy, it's different for me. I have a different perspective, and I come from a whole different place. But my mom exudes a lot of toxic femininity, and I've always been very close to her, and I've always tried to emulate her in many ways. So I've kind of been trying to unpack it, but that's one way that I know I engage in toxic behavior towards men. And I think it's such an injustice, and I always feel horrible when I do it.
It's the weirdest thing, because whenever anybody comes up to me and talks to me in public, I just assume they have good intentions. It's like I've never, like, and it doesn't even matter, even if they're like, a drunk homeless person or whatever. I just assume that they're okay, that they're just a person, and they,
Well,
maybe they want some change or something, but it's not like they're gonna, do anything to me. And this is, I think, what gets my daughter. She shocks the hell out of people, because she just always assumes that people have the best of intentions, and it's almost like the moment that she sort of expresses that that's what she's expecting, right? I'm expecting that you have the best of intentions, and I am going to act accordingly, right? And she's very self-possessed too, right? She's not meek or naive, or she doesn't look insecure or nervous or anything, but she just does this thing where she imposes the best of intentions on these people, even if they didn't have good intentions. They don't know how to deal with somebody who just assumes, of course you don't mean me any harm, because, yeah, no, that wouldn't even cross my mind, because it's just not going to happen, right? And, yeah, no, thanks for inviting me to that party. Have a nice day. Nice.
I think it's also a function of shyness too. I mean, if you have social phobia, the tendency when people approach you maybe is not to be very charitable in in your interpretation, just because you're being flooded with anxiety. So I would say that's a component of it. But I understand those feels there, and I have those fights as well
I think a lot of
with
people
myself.
do.
And it's like, I mean, we talk about this toxic femininity, these toxic female behaviors, but I think each one of us has experienced them and not like what they saw in themselves, and at some point made a pact and said, you know what, I want to change that. Maybe I'm speaking for you guys, but
Well, I wanted to point something else out though too. This is something that women do and women experience, but it's not unique to women. I mean, I know guys that have difficulty if a woman approaches them in public at all, and it's because of the things that they've experienced in their lives. You know, I know guys who are afraid to be approached by women simply because they've experienced false accusations to a degree where they're afraid that they're going to be falsely accused of something, or that their actions, their innocent actions, are going to be taken in a particularly negative way, and they'll prejudge women around them as being biased against men, or sexist against men, and prepared to judge them harshly based on things that they've experienced in the past, or things that they've heard, things that they've seen other guys go through, and things like that. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that the tendency to judge other people and to presume motives, to basically assume motives, that's also something that is not necessarily in and of itself a gendered trait, but there's gendered styles of doing it. And I've noticed that women around me do it, and I've caught myself doing it over smaller things than you usually see from men. And a big one is like when we talked about liars the other day. And I had to point out to everybody that there's a difference between a person who lies and a person who misspeaks or misstates based on false belief. That if you believe what you are saying, you are not lying, even if what you're saying is not true. And not a matter of dishonesty under that circumstances, but mistaken beliefs. And that's something that, like, a lot of people will judge people who say things that turn out to not be true as having intentionally misled, whether they did or not. And it's very hard as an individual who does that. You know, if you mistakenly believe something, or if you find information, you misinterpret it, and present your interpretation, and then somebody says, well, no, you're lying, this is the way it is. As soon as they've decided that you're lying, there is no convincing them that you didn't understand something about the information. Very frequently, people, once they've decided that you were deliberately dishonest, that's stuck in there. And that I've seen both sexes do. But at the same time, that's a bigger thing, because nobody likes to be misled. That's actually very upsetting, you know, when you find out somebody's misled you, or somebody has presented you with information that, had you not known better, would have misled you. And it's bigger than, say, you know, your significant other saying hi to somebody in the mall. But I've seen women interpret their husband or boyfriend saying hello to a former classmate, and maybe talking about, hey, when's the class reunion going to be? Oh, it's next week. Well, I'll try to be there. You know, things like that. Just very innocuous conversation. You know, they walk away from that. How long have you known her? You know, how many times have you seen her when I'm not around? Are you guys actually secretly fucking? And I've actually seen women do that, and that was like just a single instance, but it's actually a fairly common response, and it's much more common for women to make those assumptions when their male significant other is you know, talking to, well, even their female significant other for that matter. I've actually seen lesbians even be worse about it than straight girls. And then I have with guys. Guys don't seem to just automatically assume as frequently that anytime their significant other talks to somebody else, that's an effort to get with somebody, or a betrayal of their intimacy and their relationship. So it's like it depends on the circumstance. There's definitely a more female style to it, and it's something I think women do maybe more frequently and over smaller issues, smaller behaviors than men do.
Brian.
I have three questions. Two of them are kind of related, but one, I'm stealing this from Theron. So, you said in the chat something I thought was really interesting, so I'm going to throw it out there. You said, do you think that autism is essentially like a hyper-masculinity, and bipolar disorder a hyper-femininity? And I think it's an interesting thing to throw out there because I've had I've met a lot of bipolar borderline. I'm sorry.
It's borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, borderline personality disorder. Yes, I'm sorry. And no, but I've known a lot of girls that have that, like borderline personality disorder. I've known a lot of them, and a lot of guys that are, on the autistic end of the spectrum at least. And I wonder if there isn't something to that. That's something to think about. And related to that, so it's sort of like a B-part question, but do you think that a woman's toxic femininity could also be something that is sort of like comes and goes with their cycle, like it's related to their hormones or their menstrual cycle? And that was the first thing I wanted to ask. And,
yes and yes.
Okay.
Done.
Yes and yes. All right. Oh crap! What was the second one? Shit.
Okay, Aaron, get in here. Yes, ask your question.
I just want to pose a circumstance, and I've already talked about this to Karen when she was here over the weekend. I told her about how I got banned from Tinder because for being trans, basically, and this is very common. A lot of trans girls experience this. Basically, guys, because the way Tinder works is you basically just look at a bunch of pictures, and then if you swipe left, you approve them. So a lot of guys kind of approve me because they think I'm really pretty or whatever, and then they start talking to me, and then only like after a few sentences they go read my bio, and like in the first sentence of my bio, it says I'm trans, and so enough guys reported me to basically get me kicked off, and I guess it's got a name. It's called like trans scare, and it's actually a legal term that you can use when you've beat a trans woman up before a sexual encounter, whatever. You can cry trans scare, and it's not a justification, but it could like reduce your sentencing. And I was wondering if that could relate to toxic masculinity.
I don't know. I think. Wow, that's a tough one. I think that
I guess we can all we all accept that it wasn't fair to ban me, right?
No, of course. There are, like, men have, particularly straight men, gay men have all kinds of freedom to do all kinds of sick shit in their sex lives, right? Straight men, like in the 1920s, they were selling anti-masturbatory devices that parents could put on their boys in the Sears catalog, right? That they could strap on their boys so that when their boys got an erection, spikes would poke into their penis, right? I mean, like, male sexuality has been really rigidly constrained, and it's sort of been it's only been just sort of recently that it's. I mean, even going to like a sex toy website, a sex toy catalog on the internet, you're gonna have like maybe 3 varieties of Fleshlight, and you're gonna have like I don't know, 8,000 different freaking dildos for women and vibrators and stuff, right? But you're going to have like 3 masturbatory toys for men, and men are going to be ridiculed for them, right? So male sexuality is placed under these really rigid constraints, and homophobia does not come from inside, guys, right? It comes from, that woman who hit on you and you rejected her and she said, "What are you, gay?" Right?
Mhm.
It comes from every time some 14-year-old boy gets taken advantage of, gets raped by his 35-year-old teacher, and a man dares to say, "Well, that's rape," and everybody asks, "What are you, a fag?" Right? And not just men. Women do it too. And if it was just men, I don't think men would be as affected by it. But it's women joining in.
Oops. If it was
So
just men, it would be ancient Greece.
yeah. So I think
No,
essentially,
I'm just teasing.
yeah, no, but I think you're kind of right there. It's essentially it's like,
Well, I mean, the one of the big differences in Rome and ancient Greece is, I mean, there was a sort of a famous line from a married guy on his wedding night. He went up to his wife and he said, "You know what? My sex life is none of your business."
yeah.
And that's sort of the attitude they had. Women kept their noses the fuck out of men's sex lives,
Well,
and
I just I think that
and
I
that was
think
the least one of some of the least homophobic societies ever.
yeah, no, and I think that essentially, what happens with these men who, they find themselves attracted to you because you are an extremely attractive woman, Theron. Um, and they find themselves attracted to you, and then they find out that you are at least, physically, in their eyes, you're a man, and
I'm a man, goddammit.
yeah.
Just say it.
Well, yeah, no, and so it's essentially now they have to question everything, and now they, like, if any woman ever found out that I was attracted to a trans woman, like, what would they think of me? Would I ever get laid again? Like, all of these things that they're and it's just this. It's not even a conscious thought process. It's just an emotional reaction to the constraints, I think, that have been put on men's sexuality. I mean, like, if you look at the kind of kinky sex that gay men are allowed to engage in and still be, like, allowed in polite society, and then you think, okay, a straight guy likes his girlfriend to put her fingers up his bum and massage his prostate, like, oh my God, like, that's disgusting, right? Because he's straight, and therefore no deviation from, the script is allowed. And women enforce this just as much as men do, if not more. So, like, I think maybe it is a function of toxic masculinity, but I don't think it's necessarily constructed or perpetuated by males. I think that women contribute at least as much.
And I would point out, like, as a data point, so in support of Karen's position, those societies where women have less to say, or legitimately have less to say, have less judgment, less of the ability to ladle judgment onto men for their sex lives, tend to be a lot less homophobic, at least in terms of the behavior. They may be quite phobic towards the identity. But yeah, so I just wanted to point that out. That might be supporting Karen's point. In those societies that women aren't given as much latitude to judge men sexually, there tends to be less angst over that kind of behavior. Okay, go ahead, Karen. Sorry.
Sorry, before everyone in the chat wants to say what they want to say, I'm sorry. Trans women are overrepresented in porn by a long, long shot.
Oh yeah, no,
So
and
I think
guys like
from
it.
my experience, straight identified guys like trans women. I don't think that makes them gay. I think that makes them explorative or whatever. And Yeah, the reason I think that those guys, because of the rigidity of their sexuality, they see me, as soon as they read I'm a trans girl, they're like, oh, that's a man, you know? They're like, and that's scary to them, I guess.
Well, I mean, it's unfortunate that they reported you, but
Well, it's one thing to like it in porn. It's another thing to be confronted with a potential sexual partner um, who is trans. I mean, I think it probably is processed in a completely different way. It's no longer sort of just an interesting thing,
Like a fetish or
well, I don't even know if it's a fetish for a lot of these guys.
no, yeah, I know. I'm just
But
like
it now it's there. It's right there. It's kind of like the first time you do anal, right? You watched a lot of anal porn. Now is the moment of truth, and a lot of women chicken out.
I think a lot of guys want to be fucked by a girl. I think they like that idea.
I think a lot of guys want to be fucked by a guy.
well,
Uh,
people in the chat are also suggesting that you might have been reported by women.
Yeah, that's one point I was
that's
going to
real
point
too.
out. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out is regarding the assault aspect of this. When you incorporate a taboo into your child rearing, this factor is a taboo. This factor is absolutely evil. You should be repulsed by or whatever, which is done to a lot of boys. Um, and it's not just from at dating age girls saying, what, you rejected me because you're gay. It goes right straight down the line in families that teach their children homophobia, and a lot of that does come from the mothers, moms who teach their kids that pedophiles are gay men
I just want to
and
say one last thing.
things like that. Well, what I'm going to say is, you get to a moment where an individual is surprised and that they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing. They're doing something that is still wrong. It's still wrong to beat somebody up. But in the heat of a moment, when they are surprised and they are raised with a bigotry or a prejudice, and taught that something is a taboo that really shouldn't be a taboo, that's something that it's a result, and I would call that, if in terms of how feminists describe toxic masculinity as a toxic aspect of hegemonic masculinity, that fits the act of beating somebody up because you find out that the person you expected to have a vagina has a penis. That is an example of accurate description of toxic hegemonic masculinity, where you teach somebody to hate where they shouldn't hate, and to react with revulsion where something isn't repulsive. And it is definitely a different act to react in a moment like that than it is to go wait outside a gay club and beat people up for going in and out of there. And I'm certain that there are people who have done that who later are ashamed of their actions, whereas they're the people that wait outside the gay club and beat guys up for going in and out of there probably think themselves justified and think they're pretty cool for doing it.
I just want to make a clarification. It couldn't have been women who reported me because I ticked off on Tinder that I'm interested in men. And if I don't tick off that I'm interested in women, women can't see my profile because there's no possibility that we match.
Oh, okay.
That would mean it would be mostly men, but that would just fall under the same thing then. It would be that act, that prejudice, that being taught that something is taboo that shouldn't be, and that is toxic.
I don't even know. I don't even know if it's necessarily because a lot of, we're getting to that point now where there's plenty of guys out there who are taught that it's not taboo. It's just another it's another way of being. Um, But I think there is, because trans people are such a small segment of the population, I think it's always going to be a surprise. Um, it's always going to be like a surprise. You're going to be looking at a beautiful woman or a gorgeous man, and you're going to be kind of shocked that
Well, there's a difference between being surprised and maybe even shocked and being surprised, horrified, and offended.
that's true.
And the thing is, I don't think that people who were not taught to hate, people who didn't grow up believing that that's something, wrong and something necessarily
Yeah,
evil or
no,
something,
I would
that they
agree.
would beat somebody up in that moment.
Yeah,
I think that is something that gets put into people just the same way it gets put into people by their families as they're growing up and by their community as they're growing up in a bigoted community to do that based on ethnicity.
yeah, no, but I can totally see somebody saying, "Wow, you're hot," and then finding out that you're trans and saying, "Oh, well, okay, I'm not interested anymore." Just like a woman might say, "Oh, wow, you're hot," and then she finds out that you drive a freaking Datsun from the 1970s, and she's like, "Oh, okay, I'm not interested anymore." Like it's just one of those things. I think that people would, or that you have, or that you're autistic, or that you have some other aspect of you that is not the
Right.
norm, right?
My
Well, it
point
is sort of
basically is,
vindictive, though,
yeah,
too.
my point basically is that if we teach our kids that they are themselves and other people are themselves, and there isn't something wrong with being different, and that you don't necessarily have to be attracted to everybody, but you don't have to treat somebody you're not attracted to as an attack on yourself either.
Yeah,
You teach people to value themselves, and you teach people to be accepting of other people's choices and other people's lives, and to accept themselves, and teach men that their sexuality isn't toxic or gross or damaging or rapey or anything like that. It's just their sexuality. And you will get to a point where that kind of surprise will not be a horrifying shock that would lead somebody to react violently to it.
yeah,
They might still not handle it in the best possible way. People don't always handle being surprised in the best possible way. People say things that they regret later, but at the same time, they won't do something physically damaging.
yeah,
And it's an unacceptable result. It's an unacceptable result that is based on an unacceptable behavior that is way too prevalent in society.
Okay.
Anna? Cherry?
Yeah, I had we kind of veered away from it, but whenever Karen was talking about the way as a society we view gay people, and how there's very much a distaste towards men that are gay in a lot of different ways, the prime example to me in that is in porn, and male actors who do a gay scene just even once, or a trans scene, they will not get hired in straight porn again. Absolutely will not ever see them in straight porn. That is a way to ruin your career. If you've been in straight porn and you do one gay scene, that's it. You're always doing gay after that. You will not be allowed back into straight. And I think it's still possibly, which in the porn industry it shouldn't be, but I think maybe somehow in our subconscious it's like the AIDS thing, like we feel like gay people are dirty or diseased or whatever. I don't really know where it's coming from per se, but I do know that, as Theron and others were saying, Hannah actually, mothers often they want grandchildren, and so they have a really big issue with their children being homosexual and not providing them that traditional, you know, system of family. And in fact, I think women and a lot of times force traditional gender roles a lot more than men do, unless we're talking about very masculinized men. But for the most part, on average, more women will enforce traditional gender roles than men would.
And
I remember sorry, just really quickly. I remember my mom was the one who was terrified of any of her children being gay, because she wanted children, and that was such a big deal. She would not stop going on about it, and she somehow thought that would deter us or something.
okay.
Allison, I got my thing. Okay, this is a good one. This is a good one, I swear.
You better be good.
No, it's good. All
I'm
right,
judging
so,
you on a 10-point scale.
all
No
right, good.
pressure.
All right, so in today, where we have a prevalence of single mothers, especially in low-income areas like the one I live here in Chicago, a lot of the boys that are born from these homes, as well as the daughters too, the girls, they engage in very violent and very toxic behavior. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's no fathers around. So with absentee fathers, you're going to have boys that don't know, they don't have a model to look at for the appropriate way to utilize their male energy. So when they engage in bad behavior, like they join gangs, they become violent, they get into fights, and they're actually very emotional, and they're quick to anger, and they're quick to lash out. And their mothers did that to them because they hit them. There's a lot of child abuse that goes on. There's a lot of abandonment that happens. So the question is that is what boys are engaging in considered toxic masculinity, or is it what I think it is, more of inheritance of toxic femininity that is actually expressing itself through masculine energy, because you have boys that are raised by mothers and then they go out into the world and they commit crimes, and they just because they don't have anybody to sort of like show them, lead by example as to what it means to be a male. And you also have daughters that go out and become, they get pregnant before their time. They go essentially sort of like doing what their mothers did. Okay, so that's my thing. Cherry?
Yeah, I think poverty and lack of education is at the core of it, because I also grew up in a place that was, impoverished in some ways, and I actually, well, going back to your question, is it just expression of toxic femininity through masculine traits? The difference is that hyper-masculinized is a problem and hyper-feminized is a problem as well. So hyper-masculinized behavior is having way high testosterone, and that actually causes you to react in anger. There are two ways to deal with stress. There's depression, and then there's anger. And women tend to go to the depression, crying, that route to deal with trauma and for their brain to overcome it. That is one way. There's literally plasticity and other things that happen in the brain during depression, by the way, that helps you overcome and deal with change. And men react to trauma and bad situations with anger and with a more of a hot response. So both of them, I don't think it's a manifestation of toxic femininity in the same way. I think it is just humans who have been driven to nothing but their instinctual behaviors and responses, because there's lack of safety, there's lack of resources. Their brains have been forced to go back to the desert conditions of living where there's no resources. Everybody's your enemy. You have to, elbow yourself out a spot under the sun and try to, screw over everybody just to survive. So whenever you have a situation with poverty and lack of education, so education exacerbates the issues that poverty causes because you don't know how to deal with them. And lack of fathers also exacerbates that because people don't know how to deal with difficulties because they don't have fathers that are more stoic and just kind of work hard and go through it and maintain a positive relations with people, or at least not positive relations with people, but treat people fairly. That is the difference, actually. Men will treat people fairly, but they will not necessarily be socially in contact with them all the time, while women are very much in social contact, but they don't necessarily treat people fairly. So I think it's not, if that answers your question, that's good, but I think I've talked myself into the corner now.
No, it's okay.
I
One last,
make
I want to
points about that before you ask another question, because I've read a couple an analysis of a study that shows that testosterone is actually not an attributable cause of violence or temper. Actually, I've read a couple of analyses of this, because the initial studies that said it was, there were some serious flaws. The other thing is, I've also seen some studies that have shown that whether or not there is a father in the house can make a huge difference between whether or not children end up becoming, unwed parents before they're adults, and whether or not they end up on welfare, whether or not they end up going into more criminal behavior. In fact, boys are twice as likely to get in trouble with the law if they don't have a father in the home, and girls are twice as likely to become unwed teenage mothers if they don't have a father in the home. So I think
Also,
having a father present makes a bigger difference than
yeah, and
any
when
other described factors there.
from what I understand, when there's not a father in the home, also, girls, they actually hit puberty earlier
Yes.
because their body is adapting to the fact that there isn't a man around, so they're looking for a man to essentially come in. So they actually hit puberty a little bit earlier than when there is a father home. When the father is around, they can actually delay, that the period delays itself. So.
Well, and
Yeah.
then there's the thing about poverty. It's hard to differentiate between poverty being a factor and welfare dependence being a factor, because the two, very often with single moms, the two go hand in hand. And this is an actual cyclical problem, because you have women are funded, especially in the United States, women are funded to be single mothers, to the point where a single custodial mother with multiple children can make more money being an unwed single mother on welfare than she can working at a job if she is an unskilled laborer who doesn't have a degree in something that would give her a higher wage for what she does. She can literally make like $60,000 a year in various benefits. People think of welfare, they think of the welfare check, or food stamps, or Medicaid, but there's like 50 different little minor benefits that you can sign up for and obtain and have regularly covered. And every time you add a child to the equation, each section of benefit rises in the dollar amount that you get. And then on top of that, you can collect child support from your baby daddies. And the folks at the welfare office will be quite happy to help you figure out how to maximize all of that, because I've heard them do it. And this creates a situation where the kids are raised by a single mom, so the father's not there to teach them how adult men are, what it means for a man to be an adult. They're raised in an environment where they're trained that dependence on government for their living is normal, and it's how people live. They're not necessarily overseen the way they should be in their education. They don't necessarily receive the benefit of the level of discipline that a man applies in the home. And so they end up making their bad choices. They end up acting out against their mother. They end up treating it as inevitable that they are going to be on welfare as adults. The boys learn not to be expected to become, providers for their families. And the girls learn not to expect to settle down with a man when they grow up. And so the next generation does the same thing.
Okay. I think with that, it is getting pretty late. So it's time. It's that time. Time for the end.
Time for the shillening, right?
Well, you want to do some shillening?
It's normally okay.
Yeah, but you're going robot. You're going robot, friend. You're going
But I
RMI.
can't.
You can't do the shilling. I'll do the shilling. You can doge down. The doge is down. All right. Okay. So if you enjoy what we have to say, I'm sure you do, since you've listened to the end of this podcast, and it's been a great podcast, I think. An exceptional podcast. Did you just cancel the? No, it's still alive. Sorry. You dinged, Doge, and that usually means that you cancel the podcast. I'm curious why your mouth is hanging open like that. Anyway, so if you enjoyed this, you enjoy what we have to say, and I'm sure you do, since you're at the end. You either really, really enjoy us, you really, really hate us, or you really, really think we're postmodern, as if cow poop. That could be it. You got 3 options there. Choose one. Anyway, please become our patron, because it's listeners like you that make this possible. www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. What the hell are you doing with your